My name is Nathan Croft. Get that out of the way. I forgot my blue card, of course. I had to forget something. I write books. I've got this book here. It's a kind of a weird alternate history, mythology, fantasy. There's a kitten as the main character. She dies a bunch. It's good times. Yeah, a kitten, not just a cat. A kitten. She's like 6 weeks old. Has wings. Flips people off. I'm also an acquisitions editor for Immortal Works Publishing, so I know our acquisition manager's been taking pitches and stuff, so we're in the dealer's room. Come check us out. And I'll pass the mic. It's a cord, so hopefully we don't trip over. Or we can talk loud, like, yeah, I mean...
You might pass it around the front.
Yeah.
Is it for the camera? Is that why they...
Oh, yeah, where's the audio guy? Maybe we need it for the camera. I feel it's super loud because I'm sitting next to the speaker.
But you can put it... Whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll give it a shot.
If it's not long enough, I can just...
It might.
We'll
Actually, it looks like it's long enough. Barely.
Let's test it.
Feel this being Dustin's lap.
Oh, all right. Well, I guess I'll start then.
Yeah.
Oh, did I turn? No, it's on now. Okay, so I'm Michelle Witte. I work as a literary agent. I specialize in children's and young adult, middle grade, picture books, and all that fun jazz. And that's about it for me.
I'm Dustin Hansen. I'm an author, illustrator. I've worked for years and years in the video game industry and in the film industry, really specializing on environment concept art and world building. And it found its way into my books, both visually and from a writer perspective. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart.
I'm Gama. I write middle grade fantasy. Go through a lot of just wondrous settings. At one point they go into the abyss, and I'm currently working on a book set in Neverland, so I work on this topic quite a bit.
Hello. Excuse me. I'm Renee Collins. I'm the author of Relic and Until We Meet Again, and I have a book coming out in October called Remember Me Always. Relic is a fantasy set in the Old West, and Until We Meet Again and Remember Me Always are love stories, little time travel-ish elements, so that's me.
Great, cool. So we'll just go ahead and get started, jump into it. I was going to say, I play video games also, so yeah, I mean, you know.
You play in environments?
Yeah, I play in environments. I've seen some, I've read about some. But no, so we've got a couple of starter questions. First is making the world a character something you decide or something that just happens? You got something here, Gama?
For me, it's always been something I decide. In one case, I mentioned one of my characters in my series going to the abyss, and that was obviously a very deliberate choice. And again, the series I'm currently working on, set in Neverland, again, that's not something that just happened. So something like that, I make a conscious decision of.
One thing I think about that is that it's not necessarily, when you're starting to write, you aren't necessarily going to think of it as writing a character, but as it goes along and as your world building gets deeper and more intricate, you know, you'll probably start noticing these things coming up again and again. It's sort of basically like the tone of the manuscript, I think, that really often changes the character. A lot of people use, Tolkien, Middle Earth as an example of world as a character, and there's just something that ambiance. When you think of it, you think of Mordor and this tower with the eye, and it's just all very much, the locations are part of just this whole world, and so that's usually what I think of.
Yeah, to me, it probably depends on what the novel is and kind of where it's set. But for me, the stuff that I write is very... I definitely use environments or location as a character, and not only as a character itself, but as a way to kind of influence or change the character. So, for example, if I'm writing a scene that takes place in a location which requires a way for me to kind of viscerally show that temperature is a part of this experience, and claustrophobia could be part of this experience. These are all things that are very environment-based, and they can really change or show what your character like how they would react in those situations. And the other thing that's really great about those in real world situations is that a lot of people have experienced those in their own personal lives, and so it's a really nice way to build an attachment to the reader and have them kind of empathize with your characters in your books, which can sometimes be hard to find other ways to do that. So environment as a way to build empathy is a really, really strong way to like pre-think, like if I need people to feel like my character is cramped or worried or in a hurry, think environment and see if you can find a way to put them in that position, like physically, because it really does build a lot of empathy.
Yeah, along those lines, I've heard of several authors talk about creating story and creating meaningful moments and things that connect, but finding places, because you've got kind of the trifecta of plot, setting, and character, and finding places where those intersect. Where it's not, you're not just progressing the plot, you're progressing the plot, but progressing or changing or encountering the setting at the same time. And the parts where those intersect can be some of the greatest storytelling moments.
I have a comment about that.
Yeah.
Something.
Yeah, no. I wonder if you can kill it.
Okay, sorry. Repeat what you last said.
I was talking about finding where the plot, the setting, and the character.
Oh yeah. Okay, sorry. I get brain fog if I eat food, basically, and so and it's fun. So I always have to write myself notes down. But as far as that, I have done a presentation on voice, multiple times, and I've developed it really. And the part that I think really relates to this, at least, is that the three elements of a story: the plot, the characters, and the setting. Sometimes they're more important. One element is more important than another, and it needs to have balance. They don't necessarily have to be all that strong. If you have a very plot-driven novel, you're probably not going to have a setting as character, unless it's like a sort of object that they're supposed to try to get to. And so, in character, sort of coincides with the, these aspects. But yeah, sometimes one will be more important than another. And it's just a matter of balance and what's important to the story.
Have you guys ever heard of the Orson Scott Card's mice quotient? He basically says, kind of what you were saying, that each story sort of falls into one of the categories: milieu, idea, character, event. And one of those things sort of comes into the forefront, let's say, in your story. And so, yeah, like in a story where, take my two books that are out. And Until We Meet Again, the sort of the relationship between these two characters and what they, it's more of an event story, and I guess partly an idea. But so basically the setting is it's a girl who's living in a house in Massachusetts on the coast, and she meets someone on the beach, and it turns out he is from the 1920s. He's living in the same house, and they can only interact with each other on the beach. So the beach is definitely part of the story. It creates a feeling, but I wouldn't say it's a character in and of itself. It's kind of just there. You're more focused on the events and what transpires between these two characters, whereas in Relic, you take the setting away from Relic. You take this, it's a story set in, did I already say this? It's the Old West, it's a fantasy set in the Old West. You take that away and the story, it's almost like it doesn't even exist. It would be a complete, you couldn't even have the story without the setting. And so that, to me, the setting is much more of a milieu book in the mice quotient, and the setting itself plays a major role, and therefore becomes like a character and requires as much work and development as a character. It totally did, for me at least. So
I'd say to go along with that, even if you have a strong influence of a setting or a place or object as that could be a character, it's not always necessarily going to be that.
Right.
There really has to be an influence, like you said, of the setting or the place influencing the characters. Like one that I was just talking to James, and it made me think of Maze Runner. Like that maze is a character, that entire thing, and that influences the story quite a bit. It influences how they act and interact, and so that one definitely is where the character, or the place, the object is a character.
Sure, yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about making setting memorable, right? I mean, you know, of course, and it depends, you know, on the story. Sometimes you want to focus on the setting and you want it to be memorable. But even when the setting is maybe least important, you still don't, you know, just want like boring setting. I mean, you know, of course, there's going to be some exceptions. One of my favorite movies, you know, jumping out of the novels, but one of my favorite movies ever is The Sunset Limited. And it's the whole movie is just in one apartment. And it's like a one-room apartment. I mean, it's a tiny apartment. And the setting doesn't really matter. There's a couple times when it comes into play. But it's not like this memorable setting, but it still works really well. So in conjunction with what makes a really good memorable setting, but what makes a really good fitting setting, and you know, striking a good balance between, you know, even if your story doesn't need it, striking a good balance of, or knowing, I guess, how much setting and how to judge it with your other sort of story elements.
One to go along with that, and just being in a single setting, Brandon Sanderson's The Emperor's Soul, if you haven't read that, it's fantastic, this novella. And I asked him about it, and he said he had challenged himself to write a book where the entire thing takes place in one room. And so you wouldn't think the room is a character, but it's basically her interacting with one other person. And it just is fascinating. And creating something like that is really difficult. If you're Brandon, you can obviously pull it off. But that is one of those instances where if you don't have many other influences, obviously the setting is going to be important to it, and hence becomes a character in that way.
I think you need to, sometimes world building, it's easy to get carried away because it's fun, right? I mean, that's sometimes the most fun is world building. But I taught a class at Teen Alpha Boot Camp on world building, and does anyone watch Sherlock?
No, I don't think anybody.
It's the super obscure little show. I'm super cool. No, and so I always say you can do as much world building as you want, but most of it you just got to put it in the mind palace, because that's where it's going to stay. And you'll find a moment when you're working in your story where the setting is necessary. But like I think you see a lot with sort of beginning fantasy writers is they're so excited about all these cool elements in their world that they just keep piling it on the reader to be like, now look at this cool thing. And it's cool, it is cool, but it's more cool to you than it is to the reader. So keep it, and there may come a time when you're plotting and you need something to happen, you're like, oh, here's where I can use the knights that ride flying kittens or whatever. And then you're like, aha, pull it out of the mind palace, throw it in. But you do have to, even when the world does play a major part, I guess what I'm saying is you have to very carefully choose which elements you're going to showcase in your story. And that's a whole other thing as to which ones, but that's my comment.
Sure, yeah.
I call that the iceberg principle, if that might help you visualize better, where you only see the 10% above the water, but there's 90% below it.
Yeah, the great thing is readers fill that in. Like, being that you like the obscure Sherlock thing. Have any of you guys read Harry Potter? Check it out. It's
I think
really
I might have heard of it once.
Yeah. But like, okay, here's a question for you.
I heard it got really dark toward the end.
Yeah. Like, what's the temperature like in Hogwarts? Like, I'll bet most of you know, right? Or you have an idea of what that is. Or like, what does it feel to walk through the room of requirement door? Like, she doesn't spell these things out. Like, if you read through and like really see how much she puts in the setting, it's very minimalist. But once again, it's almost that empathy thing again, right? Like, we've all either been in rooms that are similar or thought about rooms that are similar or seen 1,000 pictures of castles and would love to do it. So sometimes making that part of that character is exactly that. Like, it's the tip. And it's enough to make somebody fill in those details. And from a writing standpoint, or a reading standpoint, that's so satisfying when you feel like you're hearing your character's dialogue, you know what the character's acting like, and we see a lot of this stuff. And environment is just such a wonderful place to literally show, don't tell. Like, just a teeny bit and let them fill in the lines. It's so satisfying from a reader standpoint.
And Hogwarts itself is like the perfect character.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
it moves
it is.
things, and it very much has a personality. That one is a fantastic example.
Yeah, you know another good thing, background, sorry, we should do a Harry Potter film.
Oh.
But one of the things you said, how do you make a place memorable? I think part of that, what works so great in Hogwarts, is you have two really good diabolically opposed things. There's multiple places in Hogwarts, but it's Harry living under the closet stairs in this terrible situation, which is bleak. It's really where we all live at some level, and the thought of having an adventure somewhere else is so memorable that having that bland thing there to compare things to that we all know about, we've all kind of lived in a little bland house somewhere and dreamt about something great happening, that removing yourself from something, having that contrast does make those contrast things really, really memorable.
And to tag on to that, sorry I keep talking. One thing about making it memorable, and the thought just struck me, to really make something really connect with readers, you have to connect with things in their life. And so for Hogwarts, when you're a kid, you wanted to go off to school. If you've ever seen castles, it creates these memories and just these emotions in yourself. And so when you read this story about Hogwarts, you emotionally connect with that place as well. And so if you can create a place where it elicits feelings, or like the Maze Runner, the maze, anyone who's ever been in one of those mazes and got stuck, you really can connect with that and you feel it. Even if the story is totally different than what you've experienced, you can put yourself in that situation.
Going to the example listed in the description, in Dune, when the character realizes how precious water is on that planet, it's when he realizes that spitting on the ground is sort of an honor there. And that by itself, that one moment sets the scene for the entire book, because it's something that he was initially insulted by, but then realized, no, these guys just gave me part of their water, and it's a huge honor. And that's one of the things that always comes to mind.
Well, I think what's interesting, what that example sort of illustrates is it's all about the details. Because like you said, J.K. Rowling, for example, to go back to Hogwarts, she doesn't describe the temperature in Hogwarts. She doesn't describe what every little hallway looks like. And I bet if you imagine Hogwarts, you're thinking of specific things, and those are like these juicy little details.
Just think
those
of
are the ones that stick in your mind.
How many books would there be if she did, though? 25,
Not to mention it would get boring.
But if you've ever been to a castle in like Europe or even, some places that try to rebuild it, it's freezing cold in those things. Winter was horrible.
But what I think of when I think of Hogwarts, I think of the pictures that talk and the staircases that move, and it's just little small details. She doesn't spend long pages and pages describing each room, but she has just enough, or in Dune, that image of that spitting on the ground is a respectful thing. It's like, oh, it's interesting. That one little thing is enough to give you a feeling of a place. So you don't need to go on for pages and pages describing the turrets and the archways.
Oh, sorry.
Unless you're Robert Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
And then go to no.
Well, some authors do, but...
Well, one thing to consider as well is the classics. Their settings as characters were different. They had to describe things. One reason I really think that they went into such detail is they didn't have movies. And so people couldn't visualize what these things were and what they did. And so they had to create the entire picture for them. But we can fill in a lot of those blanks ourselves. But if you consider, Wuthering Heights, the Moors are absolutely a character in that book. And she goes into explicit detail. But nowadays, if you tried to write the same story and went into as much detail as some of these do on the settings and other things, you'd have readers putting it aside and saying, I'm bored. And so that's what, to go along with that, you don't want to overdo the details because that's just not how we write nowadays. Unless you're trying to copy the old style, but that's pretty...
Yeah, I mean, there's a time and a place, but what you're saying is totally true. I mean, we've got Instagram and, you can get on Google Earth and just explore half the places you read about, explore ruins in, Cambodia, whereas, years ago, people didn't even know that stuff existed. In half, at least in most parts of the world. So
it's true. We're spoiled.
If you say the Eiffel Tower, you don't need to describe it. Everyone knows what it looks like. Whereas, I guess that's an interesting point. 100 years ago, they wouldn't. Did the Eiffel Tower stand up?
It was 100 years ago.
You know what
Yeah, that one was like 1899 or something.
Close. Yeah, no, we're good. Nope. So you mentioned you started. I mean, I guess we've all kind of mentioned a little bit, but you kind of started talking about the mood and the feel of a setting. And one of the things I wanted to do for you guys out there is try and give you some tools and some more practical aspects instead of just hear about how cool some places were in some books, but really give you a sense of the pros and cons to having a setting be a character. So the question here would be, what are some of the pros or cons of setting as a character, and maybe more specifically, what are some things that a setting as a character can do, or even just a setting, what can it do that plot and and then characters themselves can't do for a story?
I think a setting transports you like nothing else in a story, for me anyway. When characters and plot, they keep you reading, of course, but there's nothing quite like a setting that just takes you to a different place. And that's what people who are, we're probably all of us in this room are readers, and that's one of the main things I think we do to read. Readers of fiction. My husband only reads nonfiction. Booze. So he reads to learn, and I'm like, boring. I read some nonfiction, but I'm like, I read because I want to experience a new place, and it doesn't have to be, Arrakis or anything, but if you can feel transported, and that, again, I think a setting can do like nothing else.
Can I tap onto your nonfiction thing now?
Sure.
So suggestion, like, if you want to give yourself a treat, read something by Pico Iyer.
Can you spell that?
Yeah, I'll have to look it up too now. So he was a travel writer for years and years and years with for everybody. He's kind of a freelance travel writer, but his stuff does exactly that, but in real world locations. And he does write about setting, but what he writes about is culture. And he does such a great job. Like, I learn more about setting reading about him, and I like nonfiction. But there's something about the way that he makes you feel. I know. I write nonfiction
You
too.
can do
I like nonfiction. It's fun.
He understands the difference between like geography and culture, and that really does kind of turn your setting into a personality or a character. I'll find it. And
Okay. To go along with that, I would just have the thought, read National Geographic.
Yeah.
Just back issues, maybe even a few decades back to see how they described it. But those writers, they're some of the top in the world, and the way they describe places, like it absolutely transports me to different places. And so that's when,
really
travel ones, things like that, those would be really good sources to see how it is done in the real life, or in the real world, so you can do it in your novel.
Okay, it's Pico, Pico, Lyer. You can find like his stuff online. Like he did a lot of stuff for. Anyway, you'll find it easy. But his book, "Standing" or "The Art of Stillness," is really an incredible book.
Check it out. Yeah, and some of the things, like, I'm a really like when setting is really important for me in a story. I know a lot of people kind of have their little hierarchy of, what's more important, a plot, a setting, or a character. A lot of people will try and skip around and say, oh, they're all equally important, but everyone has what they like best, or at least what they relate to best, I think. And sometimes maybe it's two, but setting for me is like awesome. And of course, I feel like that's less common, that setting is kind of a number one for people. But I also feel like it's more important than people maybe think, because it's always in the background, even if it isn't at, the forefront character or whatever. But I feel like it sets the mood and the feel a lot in scenes. And so while I'm still, coming up with some of the questions for that, I'm still kind of trying to brainstorm, the pros and cons as well, the setting. But I really like the mood and feel. And if I am reading a scene, and this is just me, and of course, you might be different, and your readers might be different than you. But if I'm reading about a character or a plot, and I don't get the feel of it, or a feel that I can attach with it, I might glaze over it, or I might not get what I'm reading as well as I could have.
To go along with that, some of the settings that really capture, or at least the genre that really, needs it is, like ghost stories or haunted houses. You have to have that ambiance, or even gothic type literature. I guess they're now calling it dread punk, but to some extent, in one aspect of it, yeah. Where you've just got that, it's very much a feel. Think of, if you've ever heard a story of Jack the Ripper, what do you think? You have this image of walking through fog in London streets, that kind of a thing. And that absolutely sets the tone for the entire story.
I'm struggling. I honestly am thinking, I can't think of a book that I've loved that the setting wasn't a major part of it.
That was my next question. I was like, what are some good books that have maybe weaker settings or settings that at least specifically are not characters? At least maybe we can pull some of those.
Maybe character. Maybe character is a different thing. Because I mean, like, if I say Forks, like everyone knows what book I'm talking about.
But that
It
one's
took me
not
a second.
as vital.
It's not a character,
Yeah, it's
right?
not a
So it's a good
character.
question. It's important because the setting's important. It kind of sets the tone of who they are, but it's not a character. So maybe there's one.
Well, and if books are more character-driven, often the setting will take a back seat to it.
Yeah.
So like Twilight, I have one writer who he does these fantastic middle grade, hilarious stories about kids and their interactions and everything, and they're just at an elementary school, and so the school, it's just a regular setting. So it's not really that important. It's just about the characters. So yeah, there are different aspects that if you want to focus on the characters, sometimes it will be important to make the setting a character, but you don't always have to.
Yeah, now they're coming to me. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Diary
think
of
in
a
a lot
Wicked
of in contemporary,
Yeah.
you get a lot.
Yeah,
of
that's
true.
Where the set it has its own feel. Like my book that comes out in October, it's more contemporary, and I did put some effort into creating the feel of this town that she's. It's kind of small, Colorado town. But at the same time, it's not a major part of the story. It is only in that she wants to get out of this small town. But that, that was something where I fairly sparingly used. I don't think anyone's going to be like, oh, the setting was just. I mean, maybe.
Well, in one subgenre that small towns become so important is magical realism, if you're familiar with it, where these small settings, just the everyday average, they still have a feel and an ambiance to them, but yeah, it depends on what you need for the story. Sometimes it just isn't as important, and other times it will set the whole tone. I'm thinking like if you've seen Pushing Daisies.
Oh, I love that show.
Yeah, I mean the pie shop, that's part of it. It feels this magical sparkle, and so the setting has to capture some of that.
Well, and I think it's interesting you bring that up too, though, because the way they filmed it, the cinematography. Has everyone seen Pushing Daisies? Go check it out. It got
You
canceled.
can watch it on the CW on their website for free.
Really? I know what I'm doing this week. No.
I absolutely watch it. It's one of the most amazing shows I've ever seen. Really.
But in the cinematography and everything it's almost fake looking, right? So they've got the green is just way greener. There's flowers everywhere, and it's just really punched up, right? And a lot of it, I mean, you can tell like half the time it's like AstroTurf. Like the episode with like the windmills and everything. It's like there's not a real place that looks like that. But it is so I don't want to say over the top, but it's so exaggerated.
Stylized.
Yeah, and
Yes.
stylized is probably a much better. They would probably appreciate stylized more than exaggerated. But
A similar one, Big Fish. If you've seen the movie or read the book.
yeah,
Yeah,
so it's-
similar tone and the colors and all that.
Mhm. Yeah, so I mean, they really knew. It was very intentional what they did with that. So, and this is the part where I might get some groans or some boos, but just bear with me here for a minute. I'm gonna hypothesize, and maybe not say that it has a bad setting because I like the setting and I love the story and I love the but it's definitely not a character, and that's Star Wars. I do not think, and I'm going to hypothesize, I do not think that, maybe not any, but almost no settings in Star Wars are characters.
I'd say the moon.
There's a couple that come close.
The Death Star is about as big a character as you're going to get.
The Death Star, and Anakin tries to make Tatooine a character by complaining about it, but I don't think it worked. I mean, I don't know about, but I haven't really, and I grew up on Star Wars, but I still don't know if I could really picture how, I mean, I know how a desert feels, but I don't feel that when I'm there, right? I might feel the power of the Force, and that's maybe sort of a setting element, I guess, a world building element. But the planets, you don't feel the vacuum of space. I mean, there's sound up there, that's part of it, but you don't feel, the coldness of the Death Star. I mean, there's some moments, but I'm gonna...
For me, at least the Moon of Endor with the Ewoks, that one, I love that setting.
I remember playing Hoth, like that we were on Hoth with my, and this was in Hawaii, so. We played that we were on Hoth.
I thought you were gonna say that you know exactly how it feels because Utah and Salt Lake.
Well,
and everybody's like been shoveling their snow and like walking back up to the like Dagobah, Yoda, But still, I mean, Hoth isn't the whole. I mean, maybe it's a little bit.
Well, it's only partial too, and maybe that's part of it. It's their scene set there, but it's not the entire thing.
It has interesting world building, but I think you're probably right that it's not a character in and of itself.
What about
Millennium
Falcon though?
Yeah, so much thinking too.
That's a character. You're right. Yeah. Okay. I said most.
Yeah, that's a big body of work to only find a few examples. So it's it's definitely character driven.
The bar scenes, there's a character kind of thing going on.
Cantina.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, the cantina.
But I think, but I'm feeling good. Like yes, Star Wars. I think, but no, I think it's a really good exercise though because there is that sort of juxtaposition where, and people are agreeing, and so that's like yes, we're doing. We're all kind of figuring out that's a character and that's not a character. And I think just analyzing. I mean, and you may have heard this, you guys. And this kind of was way off topic, but. With writing groups, reading and exercising and critiquing and analyzing stories is where a lot of writing experience and where a lot of sort of writing technique comes from. And so I analyze Star Wars and figure out what's a character and what's not.
Yeah, that's a great exercise for pretty much any book or show.
Show or movie. I can't watch. Movies and books and TV shows have been ruined for me. Really, because I cannot watch without analyzing. I drive my husband crazy because I'm like, this is called the darkest moment. And he's like,
oh my gosh. Does anyone watch Castle? Well, Castle's the best for that, I think, because he's a writer, so it's like you feel like you get to pick it apart because the
That
writers
first
and the writing.
episode was the most amazing thing I've seen.
It was so good.
I mean,
But my wife
it was brilliant.
always wants me to shut up because it's like, oh, red herring, you see that? Oh, there's Chekhov's gun.
Well, I feel like once you learn, and maybe you guys have even experienced this yourself, once you've learned or tried to learn how to build a story, then when you're watching a movie, you can see the scaffolding. You're like, I know what they're doing. Very rarely am I really shocked because I can see it because it's like I worked so hard to try and build my own stories to make them, surprise, twist, and I'm like, okay, here's why they're bringing this up. And it's like, la, 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 la.
It's worse when you're an editor, though, and you analyze and pick apart novels, or, just as your job, and then when you try to read for pleasure, you're like, all right, turn it off. It doesn't always go away.
The movie Revenant, I was calling major events by the minute. This is going to happen in 15 minutes exactly, and it was to the minute.
But when it does get you, it just feels like this great wink from the writer. You're like, yeah.
And I think it's good, though. I think, like you said, I mean, that's kind of the price we pay, I guess, but it's important.
Yeah.
Like, after every movie I watch, every book I read, I think, what made this work? Why did this work for me? Why did I enjoy this? Or why didn't this work for me? Why is this obnoxious to me?
We've talked about different genres that use setting as a character, but contemporary is a harder one. But I thought of one example that I think really works well is Longmire. If you've seen either the show or read the books, that he's in a smaller town right next to an Indian reservation, and in Wyoming, where all these different elements combine together, and so there's so many interactions that like the reservation is very much a character in that because it has so much influence on different aspects, and then the town, and just that whole interaction. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I totally agree with Longmire. And when you mentioned it, I thought of another book too that I'll bring up to it. Maybe if setting becomes kind of the center of conflict, maybe that helps it become a character. Because I was thinking Wonder by the R.J. Palacio book. That school itself isn't particularly unique, but the situations that happen in that school and being that it's forced to have a lot of people in one place for a young boy who is deformed. I don't know if you haven't read it, you might not get these references, but it's a good book. The setting of the school, it's kind of that claustrophobic thing. He's in a very bad position where he's surrounded by people who are difficult for him. In any other setting, that probably wouldn't happen. Like, no parents, like he's on his own. It's kind of I don't know. It's interesting. Maybe if it does. Maybe if setting becomes like the center of conflict, maybe it does become more of a character.
I feel like maybe that could be a good test Like if you could switch out the setting for a completely different one and it works just the same, then maybe your setting's not a character.
I thought of a middle grade I don't know if it's contemporary, but the setting is totally a character. The Wayside School books. Setting, character.
There you go.
I need to read those.
I know those are good.
Or the magic
it's been a
school
while.
bus, or things like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. So there's been a few hands, and I've kind of been like, we'll get to you. So let's go ahead and go for questions. So I promised you first. I kind of gave her this verbal, like, yeah, we'll get to it. You don't have to kill your arm. You know. We're catching Gama up on Wayside School.
Is it Louis Sachar who did those, or is
Yes.
it Louis Sachar? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Sachar.
At least I think it was.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things I was thinking about is one of the best examples I can think of for like Lord of the Rings is like how, like for Mirkwood, like when the conflict in Mirkwood is the spiders, right? But when you think of Mirkwood, you don't think about the spiders first. You go, oh, Mirkwood, it's so mysterious. And when they talk about Mirkwood, they're not like, oh, there are spiders that we need to watch out for. They're just like, oh, Mirkwood in general is scary and we need to watch out for it. So it's kind of one of those things where you're like, if you don't even, like if you think about more of the mystery of it, like rather than the details inside, is that kind of more of a, like, inclusion that it is a character?
Yeah, I mean, I think personally that Mirkwood is definitely a character. I think of it and the way I feel about Mirkwood, seems
Remind
like a
me, is
character.
that the one with the ants, or is that the? I haven't read the books in so long.
It's
The Hobbit.
It's the one with Old Man Willow.
Oh, that one. Okay.
But it's also
I've read them all.
the
I
place,
just there's so many.
but it's also where in the Hobbit you have the spiders.
Oh, I gotcha.
And Pomber.
after the ring and
Yeah.
after the fake Azog scene.
Or even the Gollum's original home. That's
Yeah.
It's
and that's,
creepy. I had nightmares about that as a child.
that might be another really fun one, because now I'm trying to think of where in Lord of the Rings there's the setting that's not a character, and I might say maybe the White City. But even then, I mean, it kind of is, but maybe it's not. Maybe I'd say it is a character, but maybe it's not like a deep character. It's kind of a shallow, like haughty. But that's exactly the kind of people that we see live there. So maybe it is a character.
A reflection of the people that live there. To go along with what Dustin just said, though, is that the conflict, when the city is attacked, and, that really brings in the conflict, and that creates, the damage to it. I always think of whenever buildings are destroyed, it always makes me cringe, because I'm like, oh, so much buildings being destroyed. And so, I feel emotionally connected to, it's weird, I connect with buildings and places.
I think that's pretty natural. Okay, I have to read it. This is like the greatest first lines ever written. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit, not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with the ends of worms and oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down and eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. Like, that's the opening lines of The Hobbit. The great thing about it is it's back to that conflict thing. He gives you the warmest, most comfortable, beautiful place. Everyone knows what the Shire looks like. It's incredible. And then he literally sends you to hell. Yeah, to hell. Yeah. And so, what's the greatest thing of all time? When the story's over and you're back in the Shire. It's the most comforting, oh, thank you. Finally I can breathe again.
I can hear the soundtrack, in the background.
But I'd be interested to see, I'd be really interested to see, to pull, your top 20 books and see how many of them open with setting. I'll bet it's pretty rare. It was a dark and stormy night.
Nowadays, and in the past that used to be the primary, opening was a lot of, the scenes, but nowadays it's more character.
It's more character, but a lot of books do have a hint of the scene at least.
Yeah, well, you have to let people have a visual, so they can envision it themselves. But this was focusing primarily on the scene and the scene itself.
But it was such a good setting as character, so maybe that's the way it worked. I don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting.
We had a hand. We'll go.
I just wanted to correct that Pico Iyer was I-Y-E-R, not L-Y-E-R.
You were absolutely right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Sorry, that was off.
I was wondering, I'm still trying to wrap my head around turning the setting into a character, and I'm thinking about how it interacts. So one thing that defines a character for me is that they have a causal quality to it, that they can make things happen or influence. And so the example like Mirkwood, the forest itself causes this dream haze, or causes this, them to get lost or be influenced. And so it's actually like the forest itself, not the spiders, are physically affecting them. The Millennium Falcon, I picture Han hitting it, and he's like coaxing it to do the things that it needs to do, and so it's like a character he's trying to persuade. And so I'm wondering if you wanted to speak to like the ability for a setting to protag or something, or act.
And I think, I like what you're saying, like, especially, I don't know if anyone has seen the Rebels series, Star Wars Rebels, the cartoon. The droid they've got, Chopper, is hilarious, but he reminds me of the Millennium Falcon, kind of, because he's always kind of contrary to what they need him to do, and he's making noises, but I feel like the Millennium Falcon's always making noises. Everyone all of a sudden's got that, in their heads from the hyperdrive not working. And they're like, come on, and even though it doesn't have its own sentience that we know of, I guess, it's probably canon, that I don't know. It's not a droid, but I don't know how Star Wars technology works, but it's not a droid, but it doesn't react, but it still kind of reacts. And then of course you've got your characters that definitely do react with it, as if it was kind of this, animate object.
I would say the two stories that really encapsulate, well, there's three, okay, classics. Wizard of Oz. That interacts, the trees, the poppies, all these things, they move and do things. Another one in the same vein, Alice in Wonderland. I mean, talk about a place that changes and acts, and doors disappear, and she's swept out in a sea from tears. Just all of this stuff. The setting, actually, it sort of controls the momentum of the story, propels her. And then the last one, Peter Pan's another one too.
So the thing about that is, if you notice, all of those were essentially portal fantasies.
Yeah, that's true.
They start in this world and go somewhere else, and that's we mentioned how so few of the books start with setting, and that's because a big part of it is contrasting the setting with what's normal. So that's one of the reasons why we don't see that many that start off with setting, because so many of them start off in the normal and they go to the setting that becomes then the character.
I would say Wizard of Oz, though, at least in the movie, I don't think the book focuses much on the Kansas, how it starts in black and white. Like, it paints a picture and a feel for there, and so when they go to Oz, obviously color and everything's different. But I would say Kansas is still a character in that one, at least.
Yeah, I'd probably say so too.
Yeah, the genre that popped up to me when you mentioned that was survival books. So like Robinson Crusoe, obviously, is a major character. Hatchet, the lake. We know there's a plane in the bottom of the lake. Like, we know those things. And then the other one to me was Lost, which is the TV series, where like the island is a literal character, and it does exactly what you're saying. It confuses the heck out of us as viewers. But yeah, the survival genre does kind of fit into that too, where it's such a major part of the conflict.
Well, because it can kill you, basically.
Yeah.
And so you're fighting against the setting, like you said, interacting with the setting where the conflict. Think White Fang, or Jack London, a lot of his books where you can feel the terror. I mean, I lived in Canada for a year and a half up in Quebec, and when you're walking through snow up to your waist, and you are freezing your tail off in negative 40 degree weather. I mean, it's really, honestly, you see movies like that and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never doing that again. And it does become a character in that aspect. So.
Yeah, I think Susan Collins is also brilliant at that. Obviously Hunger Games, but I actually think I'm going to be in a lot of trouble. My favorite of hers was the Gregor and the Overlander series. I think those were just brilliant.
I know a lot of people who say that.
Really? Yeah. I just thought they were so whimsical and fun, and definitely played a big part. The setting was definitely a character.
And I think something that we seem to keep kind of touching on, though, is the interaction. Like, both how the characters interact with the setting as far as it crosses paths with what they're trying to accomplish, or what the plot, where the plot sort of, either bends or turns because of the setting, but also the reactions, like like with Hunger Games, and she reacts to the setting by shooting the things in the shooting the panel, and so maybe those are some of the tools you've got as writers, as sort of cheats to, if you're going for setting as characters, to have your characters think of your setting as another character in a way. Kind of like the Millennium Falcon, I guess, going back to that.
I think there's a difference, it's coming clear in my mind, clearer, that there's a difference in like a very vivid setting that takes on a quality of a character and setting as an actual character, as in it plays a pivotal role, like Hunger Games, or think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. The Chocolate Factory is a character because it's, without that, that's the whole purpose of the story. Whereas, you know, again, with Star Wars, why maybe Star Wars isn't setting as a character, there are vivid settings in that story. So I think maybe that's in my mind, it's that maybe it's that interaction and the sort of the purpose of the setting.
That's a good
role that
distinction.
it plays.
Yeah, that is.
And to go along with, I can't remember who said it, but that the setting has to act itself, I think, is what determines it more as a character, because characters can't just sit there and do nothing, even if it's pretty. So yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Like another thing that I think I've noticed that distinguishes between like establishing characters, like settings as characters, is like, because in like Lord of the Rings, like Hobbit, it's describing how comfortable and warm it is, and then like in Star Wars, it's like a galaxy far, far away. Okay, like it doesn't tell me anything about the setting. It doesn't tell me anything about, like, I know it's a galaxy. That's nice, but it's like that description.
Don't forget when.
Yeah.
I mean, you're like, what? When? It's like a joke. It's like a thing, but it doesn't really give us anything.
But actually, time period is part of setting too. And one of the most unique things. Well, you mentioned you're right. Time travel.
I mean, definitely.
That's definitely.
But I'm not in Star Wars. It doesn't.
No.
It's hard to compare a book to a movie.
Well, like
Because a book's going to have
steampunk,
way more room to describe.
if you consider steampunk, the time is essential to it.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, when I'm saying even Wild West, that's not the Wild West, the Old West. Maybe it was the Wild West.
I kept asking my agent that. I'm like, should I call it Wild West, Old West? What is it?
Yeah, see, words matter.
Wild old.
But yeah, that is the interesting thing about Star Wars. My only Star Wars thing, because I'm a total Star Wars fan, is that it is the sci-fi set in history. That's really unique. Like most sci-fi is the other way.
Yeah, but yeah, and it is cool. But as far as, I mean, if you were to take that out, I mean, it wouldn't. Well, it'd be Rogue One. But if you were to take that out, it still doesn't really change anything. It kind of changes how we think, and it's a cool thing, and I definitely like it. But it's not necessarily. Well, it's not essential at all.
Yeah.
But I mean, the story maybe loses a little bit if you take it, but maybe not. That's
But again, though, I would say that's the distinction in your setting. Your world does not have to be a character. And it can still be an amazing, vivid world, and you should strive for that. But it's a different thing to have it be a character in that it plays an important role in the story and the plot.
Sure. And I definitely, like, I hope that we've touched on some of the pros and cons of that too. Like, we've mentioned like some of the, if your setting is not necessarily a character, your characters can maybe be better characters, or maybe your plot, it just kind of depends on that sort of triangle. Or, if you're going with the mice quotient, paying attention to some of those other things. But I think can be very valuable to kind of at least know what it is that you've done or are doing. And
You should know.
Yeah.
You'll probably feel it anyway. Take any story you're writing, you have an idea of what the sort of central point, where on the mice quotient it falls. You probably just intuitively know whether or not the setting needs to be a character.
I would say along with that too is sometimes people throw them in and it just doesn't fit with the story. You have to figure out what the intent of your story is and if that'll help. And if you do have a setting as character and it's not working, just kill your dog. That's another character you might have to at least not necessarily get rid of, but tone it back a lot. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Because like I said, plot-driven, character-driven, it might be more of a hindrance to the actual story moving forward than necessarily the ambiance it would bring.
Sure. Yeah.
You guys talked about this earlier, but internal metric, and I think it comes from reading a whole bunch or looking at a whole bunch of art or something. In order to edit really well, which is also how you write well, how you know what direction to write. You have to have that internal metric very strong. And you were saying something that I thought tied into that, and I've forgotten what it was.
I think we're at time. I don't know if anyone.
Yeah, we're just about. So let's